Today we're going to be working on the air conditioning system on a 2003 Chevy Silverado. This one's got a 4.8 in it. We're going to be removing and replacing the air conditioning compressor. So we'll start up top here, take loose this clamp on the throttle body. Got a clip here that's attached to the hoses, so we'll push that out. The mass airflow sensor has a little locking tab that you can pry up on. I've already got it unclipped. That gray piece moves up, and then you can depress the tab from here and pull up on the plug. Next, we'll want to try and work this hose assembly off of the throttle body and airbox. Use my trim tool just to push into this hose, get it to where it's loose from the airbox, then you can peel this up out of the way. The air cleaner box itself with the filter in it, you should be able to just pull up on the housing, and a couple of rubber plugs in the bottom is all that holds it. Next, we'll want to separate the hoses from the upper fan shroud. And there are some push clips down here. Just a couple on each side. Then you can take the 10mm bolts out of each side of the top of that. You should be able to work that up out of there. I'm gonna have to use both hands here, but you fold that radiator hose out of the way and you'll be able to lift this shroud up out of there. I'll show you a better shot. Get it out from underneath this radiator hose. You basically have to just fold that in as close as you can get it. And then you should start to be able to remove it the rest of the way. Just kind of gotta keep lifting the hoses and getting the pressure off of it. Next, we need to take the fan off. I don't have a fan clutch tool, so I'm just going to be using a large crescent. And then I'll probably put a clamp on a pulley with a belt to hold it as still as possible, and smack this with a hammer. I'll try it a couple times without having to clamp the belt, but usually it slips. Yep, it's slipping, so I'm gonna have to hold the belt still on one of those pulleys. Alright, so this one has an idler pulley right up here on top. That's what I ended up sticking a clamp on to hold the belt still, and it was enough resistance that I could go ahead and knock this loose. And you can spin it off, you just don't want it to hit the radiator. Next up, you can remove that lower shroud. It's just resting down in there. The reason for removing all of that is to have access to remove the compressor out the front here. Otherwise, there's not a lot of room because the frame of the truck is right beside the compressor. So you may be able to take it out through this hole if you disconnect these heater hoses and drain some coolant and make a mess, but I didn't feel like doing that, so. Next, we're going to remove the belt. Earlier I said idler pulley. This is actually the tensioner pulley. 15 millimeter on that. Next, we're going to go underneath the vehicle, remove this cover. A bunch of 15 millimeter bolts. Next, you can put a 3/8 drive ratchet in this tensioner. Take off that AC belt by pushing it towards the block. And then once you get it off the AC compressor, you can slip it all the way off. While I'm underneath the vehicle here, I'm going to take out these two bolts. One's right here, and one's right here. So those are 15 millimeter. I'll try to get on them with a wrench first. Bust them loose and then put a ratcheting wrench, or if I can reach a ratchet up in there, I will. I'm using the 2-wrench method where you lock one end to the other in order to break that bolt loose. I'm going to switch to a ratcheting wrench, and this is very slow going, only a couple clicks at a time. So I'm not going to bore you with a 10-minute video of that. This front bolt you're not going to be able to take all the way out anyways, because you're going to run in to this bracket that holds the front differential up. On that back bolt, I've just got a 15 millimeter shoved up in there sideways. And I used a 1 1/8" wrench to get the leverage to push up and break that bolt free. And then I'll put a ratcheting wrench up there in place of that one. This one doesn't take as long. It doesn't have quite as such a small space to turn your wrench. This bolt will come all the way out, whereas that other one, there's not enough room before that bracket. Next, we'll do the fitting for the hoses going into the compressor with the 13 millimeter. Kind of move that hose out of the way. flexible so you can put it in several different places. Just going to access the 2 bolts on top now. One's right here, and one's right through here. Both of those are 15. Get on the front one first with a ratchet. The top back one is shorter than the others. Got an electrical plug right there that needs unplugged, so you have a tab on top and bottom, or on both sides, however you want to look at that. So disconnect that next. Got one more line to disconnect down here. All right, once you get the compressor all the way loose, kind of weave it out through the front here. Careful not to get the electrical cords hung up. That wire back there was getting caught on the bottom ear of the compressor, so I had to do a little finagling to get that loose. But it should pull right out the front. You see that one bolt doesn't have enough clearance to come all the way out, so you'll have to reinstall the new one with the bolt in that same position. So you always want to compare the new unit with the old unit, where the bolts go through, where the fittings attach, how the electrical connectors are. So these are all a match. I do have to take the bolt out of the old one. Gonna have to push that out, I guess. It seems to be a little bit seized, and put it into the new one. I drained the old compressor to see how much oil was in the system. It was literally nothing. So there was a leak somewhere, probably at the compressor, because it failed. But I drained the new one. There was about 6 ounces in it, and it should be 8 in the system. So I went ahead and added the correct amount. I put an ounce in the condenser when I replaced it, and an ounce in the dryer, the accumulator. So there's 6 that goes in the compressor. That's 8 for the system. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the plugs here so that I don't spill the oil out as I'm putting the compressor in the vehicle. And then we'll get it bolted up and lines attached. All right, I'll attempt to explain how I got this in there. It would only go in one way for me. So I put it in from the front. We had the bottom right bolt. You can see the head of it right there. Already had to be installed into the case of the compressor. But the only way that it would go down and in at the same time was if you take my hand as the same orientation as the compressor, it had to be out at the back. So I had to slip it kind of down, out at the back, put that bolt in the hole, and slip the head past that structure right there, that bracket for the differential, then I could swing the tail end in and lift it up to install this bolt and then install this bolt. But the only way I could get that bolt passed was at an angle coming in like this. Hope that makes sense and save somebody some trouble. So go ahead and get the rest of the bolts in and tighten down and plug back in that electrical plug, and then we'll keep moving. Normally I would have went ahead and put the belt back on. Now that the compressor is tightened and electrical plug is in, I would have put the belt back on and then put the cover plate back on the bottom. But the belt that I took off is pretty much trashed, so it's all dried and cracked. I need to get another belt, and the part store is closed right now, so I'm going to go ahead and hook up the lines right there on the side. Hook up the lines, get the O-rings replaced, and stick the vacuum on here, make sure there's no leaks while I wait for tomorrow to get the belt. And I also need to get 26 ounces of Freon. Here's the two sizes we need to match. So just dig in this bag that came with the compressor kit. Looks like that's the right one for the large line. That's the right one for the small line. Put a little oil on those rubber part of those gaskets, and we'll get those replaced and the lines put back on. Get those two lines replaced, and I'm going to go ahead and pull a vacuum on the system. The next step will be belt back on that bottom tensioner back of the pulley in the AC. Then we can put the main belt back on, put the fan back on, put the bottom cover on, put the shrouds back on, and we'll be back in business. Airbox and everything is up and running. All right, next up we're going to put on the AC belt. So 3/8 drive ratchet in this tensioner, and we'll just get the belt installed. I went around the air conditioning compressor first, and then around the crank, the tensioner here last. Next up, we'll reinstall that shield. Just started one by hand to get it held in place. All right, this is how I've got it started. So it's around the tensioner pulley, the crank, back up and around the water pump, down and around the power steering, up and over the alternator. And I'm just going to push it down over this idler pulley whenever I pull on a tensioner. Try to get this in view, but just creating enough slack to push it under this idler. That's how you get the belt reinstalled. Next, we're going to slip that lower shroud underneath this radiator hose. There are little slots, plastic slots on the side of the radiator right here. That lower shroud rests in those slots like a little cradle. So once that's in place, then we'll put our fan back on. Might have to put my foot down for this. Same method as before. We're just going to knock this crescent wrench with a hammer one time. Next, we'll reinstall the upper shroud. That's going to take a lot more finagling of these hoses while I try to get that worked in here, so I'll have to set the phone down for that. We got our 4 push clips down there on the holes on the side. First you put the clip in and then push the center down. Put your hoses back in there, clips and retainers and clamps. I'll have to move my AC vacuum up out of the way here somewhere and reinstall the air box and the air breather tube to the mass airflow sensor and throttle body, and then we'll be ready to charge the system. Reattach your hose clip there. Tighten that hose clamp. That's how you get the compressor changed. And now you charge the system, which I have another video on that. If you like today's video, please subscribe to the channel.